All right, everyone. Hi, and welcome to this week's Delegate Office Hours, Thomas Fluid GovComs, and thank you for joining us. This week, just as a friendly reminder, we didn't put out a poll necessarily just for the topics this week. We just wanted some comments made in the forum, and we did get a response back from Raphael, who was talking about the MKR conversation. So Raphael, I'll let you can kind of kick us off, and if others got some great topics they want to talk about, as I know a lot of activity has been going on, we can kind of go in your direction. So Raphael, I'll let you go ahead and start with the comment that you had, and then we go from there. Raphael, you have the floor.
Thanks, Thomas. There have, like this month and last month, there have been a couple of MKR vesting proposals. I think there was one pro rata proposal from RWF 001 contributors that got voted down. Now there's one up from GovAlpha. There was one from the StarkNet unit, and there's one for delegates, and maybe I forgot another one or two. And they're all different. And it kind of makes sense because different people have different risk profiles and different workloads, and maybe should get compensated differently. But I feel that we're in the process of a piecemeal, very ununiform and compensation structure that in a way is driven more by current sentiment than by any formal concerns or deeper and strategic thinking. So I'd personally love to get to a point where contributors, core units, and delegates kind of know what they can expect from the DAO and what they cannot expect, and where there's a certain expectation of what we try to achieve with MKR vesting. And so that's the discussion I'd like to have personally.
Yeah, so I'd love to jump in here as a follow-up, representing the perspective of a core unit facilitator, right? So I'm actually one of the core units, GovComs, that hasn't put forward an MKR compensation proposal for my team because of so many different proposed standards, and basically, you know, my strategy was to sit back and kind of wait for you know, the one that's most equitable, the one that fits with the longer term strategy for incentives of my teammates. Like I was kind of looking for something that was simpler, that didn't have like a ton of like really complex stuff that I had to keep track of, and so yeah, like I think one thing I realized, like don't expect the DAO to to create such a standard unless there is like a really a sort of push from delegates, I think, to maybe hire a independent third party to create a standard compensation sort of proposal. But the way they are now, kind of the existing ones, it's like we're gonna have never-ending debates about which ones make sense, which one doesn't, from inside of our stakeholder groups. So I think it was Robert from CES who was advocating for either the delegates or whoever else to really seek out a declaration of intent to find a third party that can do this, that has you know, visibility into you know, industry comp for like tokens and all that stuff. So that's some of the stuff that's on my mind, and I'll shut up now.
No, thank you, David. That's great. We really appreciate that, especially given that I think we actually got a comment too about that from Code Night. And then Raphael, you got your hand raised. I'm gonna get right to, but I just wanted to mention that in the chat while you were talking, David, that Code Night put that up, a rough draft of the standardization MKR vesting. So
yeah, I think Code Night put forth a very good proposal, and then just in case, me and couple of other delegates met with Tina Ferguson from A16Z to ask about equity compensation, because they changed, like they have deep insights into like startup equity compensation. And she referred us to a portfolio company of theirs that's called Pave, that has like a large database of compensation structures. And we're currently in the process of querying that. So we are thinking about that, but we haven't had the time to really get to the bottom of the data here. So I hope that this will be conclusive. But I think just in general, I wondered if MKR vesting is seen as like an additional pay or more like long-term vesting, kind of incentivizing long-term value accrual for the protocol in a way, or for the stakeholders.
All right, thank you, Raphael. There's another comment in the chat too from Mark who says, suggested 18 months ago, people didn't want to pay for it at the time. Laugh out loud. Martin, do you want to add to that comment? And know if you wanted to say anything or add to that.
I mean, I think like 18 months ago, like we didn't have delegates, right? Like we didn't have as rich of a delegate community. And I think between all of the core units, the responsibility for, putting together or like pursuing this was kind of diffused. And so it was kind of like a tragedy of the commons that a real standard never got picked up and like nobody did like an SPF or whatever. So I think like maybe the context changed now with the amount of delegates we have, and with also like the more active participation from A16Z, for example. Yeah, I think we have a better chance now for doing what you were suggesting.
Yeah, I hope that can be achieved. I mean, I think ideally, because MKR vesting for delegates was also proposed, and that kind of suggested that we have like a really long-term vesting and have like maybe even 4 years or something. So that there's a very clear incentive that in the end, we want to make the decisions that benefit the protocol and that benefit the token holders, because I think that's it. But at the same time, I think we can't put token holders before the health of the protocol, right? It doesn't make any sense to say I buy Coca-Cola stocks and then I vote to make the stock more valuable. It's always driving the product that makes the stock valuable and not vice versa.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Is there any way to get some background color on how we got here? I feel like the original, not the original, but obviously the Maker Foundation probably had some kind of scheme, which I have no idea what that was, but I would imagine some of the proposals that came on early on by protocol engineering and the early core units was similar to that. But then I remember correctly, I think Juan of SCS might have been an author of kind of a formula how to figure out MKR vesting, the cliff, etc. Does anybody have a background on how we got here, why we're here, and why not every core unit that's getting onboarded or that got onboarded in the past followed the, I hate to call it the SES model, but I don't know what else to call it. Does anybody have any idea that they can kind of refresh my memory?
Frank, are you referring to like in the foundation and what we did there and then the transition to the DAO?
Yeah, and I remember Juan worked on some stuff about what the cliff should be and blah, blah, blah.
I know specifically about the foundation plan, and the plan was designed based upon RTU, restricted stock unit program, but it was a token, right? So the token was used in lieu of a stock. There were grants that were given, there were vesting schedules, and then there were different amounts that were given based upon the level you were inside of the organization. And a lot of times the level was based upon the type of position and the responsibility. So to me, when I saw that plan, and by the way, it took a while for it to be put together, they're not easy to do. And it looked like pretty much a typical type of tech company RTU program that I've experienced in the past. When we made the transition into the DAO, there wasn't there were a lot of thoughts in my, at least in my opinion, a lot of thoughts that we put together a plan. And I know Wouter was also spearheading this as well, and putting together a plan based upon obviously the more senior, the more impactful the role, the more in compensation from an incentive perspective would be based upon the salary that the individual was being paid. And you could have some loose correlation between the amount of salary someone gets and the value they could bring into the organization. So it was another type of program that was presented, and in the absence, I think, of anything else, people just started to adopt it. I mean, we adopted it in CES because it seemed like a logical program. In my opinion, the shortcomings is that the vesting periods are too long, and there wasn't the ability to stack grants because it was designed as a one-time program. And then as we had the independence of each of the core units and being able to do whatever it is they wanted to do, so they had the ability to take the path of least resistance and adopt that, or develop their own. And because there was familiarity with it, because PE was the first group that went through, so other groups just looked at that as a model and started to adopt that. And it seemed like there was a correlation between the more technical, the more impactful the group was, the more it made sense to do pretty aggressive MKR grants. And then for the groups that maybe were less, the perception of being less impactful, that the grants were lower. So that's just some history that I experienced based upon living through the foundation and then the transition into the DAO, and also with my own core unit.
All right, thank you, Robert. Really appreciate that historical perspective. I think we had a couple of comments in the chat. If others that wanted to follow up on that was Mark. I believe maybe you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, so I can give a brief history / refresher for like just the DAO. And basically, once PE proposed their core unit onboarding with a significant MKR vesting package, that's when really all the discussions started around the DAO. That's when every team started thinking about when and how much Maker they wanted for their own compensation. And the community decided to form a committee to come up with a plan, and it was made up of one large maker holder, which is Planet X at the time, one small token holder, which is myself, one person with a prospective core unit, and one with a current core unit. And so those two other people with Derek from the engineering team and Long for Wisdom and Gov Alpha. And throughout this process, we tried to come up with something, and there's a lot of back and forth. And then Planet X decided to kind of go rogue and post something without consensus among the team. So myself and Long ended up splitting off after that proposal was rejected and working on our own plan. Simultaneously, SES was coming up with their own plan, and the community was basically left with multiple options. And I gradually watered down my proposal over time, and there was just so much discussion and concerns of various aspects to standardizing the maker comp at the time that even a super watered down version of our MIP proposal, which was super broad and super flexible, there just wasn't the appetite to pass anything at the time. So I think the Koreans probably had a lot of influence in kind of deciding that everyone just do what they want themselves. So that's why you have really no standard model. I guess probably around half the DAO, maybe slightly more, use the SES model, and then everyone else just uses whatever they feel like. It's like Gov Alpha, PE, Growth, my core unit, SF, all have plans that are unique relative to SES's model. So that's it's just been a super divisive and complex topic, and just due to the history and complexity around it, a lot of effort's gone into it without any results. You know, there just hasn't been an appetite from anyone else in the community to pick it up. And yeah, literally when I started on the committee, I was like, this was back when I was a community member and just a maker holder. I was like, we should just hire an independent party and pay them to do this analysis. It's super common to do that. And no one else wanted to do that. So ironically, Rune's kind of, I think, hiring someone for that type of role for the end game, but we should probably still think about it, you know, in advance of that launching.
Yeah, thanks for that refresher, Mark. Really appreciate it. And Robert as well, for the input from the Maker Foundation days. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely why we're here, right? And I think Long for Wisdom made a point there in the chat about the standard model. And I discussed this with, I think with you, Raphael, that I don't think it fits everyone, right? Because you can't pay the CEO of JP Morgan the same amount of vested stock, JPM stock, as, you know, the bank clerk that sits at a local branch. So yeah, I mean, but definitely we need to kind of resolve this. And interesting to hear that maybe the end game is going to have someone that's an expert in this. So we'll see how that goes.
I mean, there's different kinds of standardization, right? Like maybe there could, like if we were to hire an independent party, or if somebody was to just create a really, really awesome like proposal, maybe like the standards would be baked into not just levels, but also like function, like engineering, ops, like whatever the clusters are, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I can kind of see like a complex standard model applying, you know, unless like our business starts taking on new functions, then the model would have to be expanded. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like that far out.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Code Knight has hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Then let's Code Knight go first. Sorry.
Sure.
I was just gonna say we should just give the CUs a pile of Maker based on their salary and let them decide how they want to distribute it out, instead of trying to define individuals based on function. That we can leave that up to the facilitators.
I don't think MKR holders want that level of like slack. I think, yeah, I think it seems like there's a big push for like very like strict accountability around comp.
Yeah, but like right now, like the facility CUs are not like, they're not employees of the DAO. They're more like contractors. So it's going to get messy if you're trying to like go to your contractor and define how the contractor pays its employees, because then you're going to have to, then we would have to like actually know how much they're paying all their employees, and we'd have to be involved in that, right? Like, because we're not involved in how much they pay DAI for each worker. We don't even really know how many workers they have beyond if they tell us.
Does Endgame propose to do that? To like set DAI compensation? I'm curious if anybody knows if Endgame's trying to do that.
Anything like that. The end game seems to go the opposite direction, right? It's pushing out to MetaDAOs where the DAO has even less oversight than we do over CUs. So like and I mean, beyond that, part of the end game is like, we're going to have all anon employees, right? And everyone goes anonymous and we don't even know who's working and who's getting paid for what.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, at least from the MetaDAO perspective.
Well, that's Rune's. What Rune said is we go for a fully anonymous workforce, and we've got these MetaDAOs that we have.
I think that's
kind of
more
less control over.
specific to the engineering team. If we're doing, I think that's what he wants for the token launch, but I don't think that's true across the org. There's a lot of people that are just already doxed. I mean, it's just not realistic.
Well, yeah, I guess they would have to be replaced over time, right?
One,
That would be the end game, right? Would be to replace them all with anonymous workers.
If you don't mind, if I know there's a lot of people want to comment, if you just use the raise hand function, and I can just call you on so we don't talk over each other. I think it's just, all right. All right, Robert, you've got the floor, and then we'll get everybody else line up.
Thanks, Thomas.
Okay.
There were a couple of things that were said, and I just want to be clear on a couple of points here. First off is that, yes, so my structure is that there's an LLC that employs my contributors / contractors. Each one has a contract. Each one has a commitment that the LLC has made to them. And that's how we facilitate the hiring and management of the people. So inside of that, commitments have already been made. And so one of the things that I just want to point out is that if we're planning to retroactively try to change anything, you're going to open a whole can of worms that the DAO does not want to get into. So I would encourage us all to make sure we do not put that option on the table, because commitments have been made, and I'm sure I'm not the only core unit that's made those commitments. So that's the first thing I want to mention. Secondly, is that as someone that has been hiring for some time from the foundation into the DAO and continues to try to hire as a facilitator, it's tough. I've got a guy that I'm trying to hire from Consensus, and let me tell you, nothing that's going on in MakerDAO right now is helping out with that effort. Mm-hmm. Compensation levels are a lot higher than what everyone else believes or may believe, and incentives are there as well. I just don't have the package to hire a really competent person, engineer-wise, because it's just not there. And to go back into the community to be able to say, hey, I need someone in MKR because, oh, by the way, my initial estimate was X, but I didn't anticipate this dramatic of a price decline. And if I use my old model for setting MKR compensation, I need a heck of a lot more than what I initially needed. But to even have that conversation right now in the community, it's just something I'm not willing to tee up. So, which prevents me from hiring someone. So this whole concept of like a bunch of anons showing up to do engineering work, we got to get a clue. That's not the reality. And there are a lot of very competent organizations that are still hiring and paying a great wage and a great incentive structure that we're competing against. And if MakerDAO wants the best and the brightest, which I do, then we've got to design a system to ensure we can attract those people into our ecosystem. So just a comment.
That's great insight, Robert. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Du, you got your hand raised. You got the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to kind of mention especially I think that what we saw recently with strategic finance team is that is, for example, contributors and Maker, somebody that we expect them to be, for example, full-time and fully committed. Obviously, ideally, that's somebody that we wanted, but I think it was kind of clear that even if that's not the case, there's no really way to punish one for it. But you can also imagine that if for more traditional or even other DeFi protocols that have companies or foundations, unlike us, they can really enforce that, right? But for us, we don't really have other means to enforce it. So I think it's kind of balanced. It's like, okay, we do provide more flexibility, which we might be lacking, to be frank, like compensation or others compared to other protocols. But on the flip side, we also get more, flexibility. So that's something that I kind of thought about these days as well. It's like, okay, if let's say we decide to give really, really attractive compensation, then do we also have the kind of rights to basically restrict what they can do outside? Just kind of food for thought.
I put a clause in my contractor agreements that state that this is your full-time position, and if you do any work outside of MakerDAO, it has to be agreed upon in writing.
I think this is a completely separate topic. I mean, we're basically talking about if we want Maker to be a company or if we want it to be a DAO. DAOs are super open, like anyone can contribute. A lot of people like contributing to multiple DAOs. It's certainly an option to restrict people from not working any other DAOs, but if we're gonna lean into that model, then we're basically gonna require everyone to dox themselves, because otherwise you're never gonna know who's contributing anonymously under other protocols and other projects. And I don't know that that's the way that people want to run the DAO.
Yeah, I don't think we need to complicate things here and get away from the subject at hand, which is trying to figure out the right structure for awarding MKR tokens. And I was just wondering, Mark, I wanted to follow up and see if you had any insight into what the end game is proposing for MetaDAOs or MetaDAO team members, or even some of the actors that fall below the MetaDAOs and the tribunals, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't know any specifics. I'm trying to work with around like a budget for the protected DAO that we're working on. And he's basically hired this third-party compensation consultant to focus specifically on that. Expecting it'll be somewhat of a conversation, but I think a lot of people are just gonna take what Rune assigns. I know that he wants to have a more active role in compensation broadly. I think he's mentioned on his DVCs before that he's thinking about doing compensation for the whole DAO, like delegates included, through this compensation consultant. But it might be a good question for us to bring up to him on the call today to see if he wants the community and the delegates kind of work through that, or if he wants to have more of a role and kind of be proposing stuff, leading stuff himself. I'll just add, like on the DAI side, like what Rune's told me is, for Protector DAO, he wants to provide basically, what he thinks is reasonable runway for 2 years, and then, the Protector DAOs basically have that period of time to get to break even, be self-sufficient, and it's all like, on them to decide how to hire their team and build their team out, within that like fixed amount of capital.
All right, thank you for that. So is there any additional comments we want to make on this topic? Okay. Couple of comments in the chat too, Josh Perkin. He brought up if we want to move on to maybe another topic. See what everybody's. There was a comment about the Lawful Wisdom's in-game commentary. I didn't know if we wanted to talk about that. Josh, you brought that up. I didn't.
Yeah, we actually just finished recording almost 2 hours with Long, so I'm going to try to release it in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Okay.
But yeah, if somebody wants to continue to roll on that and he has the energy to do it.
So, Frank, your brain is also fried from the last 2 hours?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that was super interesting. I mean, breaking down the end game is mission impossible. Very hard to do in one single recording, but we did get a lot of the input that can possibly be verbally used by Long for Wisdom, and so I really appreciate that. I don't know if do you have any questions, Tim, that you can think of that we didn't ask that maybe you could ask right now? Or maybe some of the folks here want to ask some of the questions they have in mind.
And maybe that's even a better question, right? If somebody here has a concrete thing.
And also Long has noted in the chat, he said he'll chat about it. With Frank and Shoopy's beer thing. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, shameless plug. It's the the Shoopy and L Pro MakerDAO Delegate Happy Hour. No sponsorship, no
Not yet.
MKR vesting, nothing. We do it for the love of the community. But I guess one question, if Long could get on the mic, that I forgot to ask was the the opposite of the straw man analogy that you wrote on your post there. If you could refresh my memory, what the hell it's called, and I had to actually look it up. You know, if you can kind of give us a brief reasoning of why you went the opposite of a straw man argument. What is it called again? Darn it.
Yeah, Steelman. Yeah, I can kind of talk about why I did that.
The Steelman.
Yeah. The sort of gist of the Steelman thing is you try and, you know, it's kind of used when you're having a debate, right? And it's where you you try to help your opponent in the debate construct the best possible version of their argument, right? In that, like, your argument is then all the stronger because you can defeat the best possible counter argument, right? It's kind of the idea. But the reason I brought it up for endgame is because I kind of feel that's not been super present, I guess, at least in the written documents. I kind of always feel just like whenever someone's sort of trying to sell you something, right, and they're only talking about like positives of it, it's not like suspicious exactly, but you're always sort of just asking like, yeah, but like you've thought about this the most, you must know what the trade-offs are, but like you're not talking about them. And like, sure, I can, like, you know, anyone can think about it and try and figure them out, right? But like, you must know some of them and you haven't written about them. So like, why? And could you do that, please? Right? Like, that's kind of the, you know, it's not like Rune is like obligated to or anything, right? Like, he's obviously trying to convince everyone to do this thing, but it's, to me personally, something is like more convincing if someone has actually looked at the, you know, the counter arguments and the counter reasons and things, and has actually like highlighted them and said like, look, like, I do think this is a good idea for these reasons, but also there are some trade-offs, some downsides. These are what they are, like, and sort of how I think we mitigate them and all that sort of thing. Did everyone follow that?
Yeah. Yeah. So Frank, I mean, essentially you make your argument more convincing by being very transparent about what the downsides could be. And to Long's point, you actually articulate what your plan would be in case that goes sideways. So instead of making things just simple pros and cons, you actually have a little bit more of like a decision tree and like some path forward.
Got it. And with the end game, where do you see that analogy not being presented or lack of?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like, you know, I don't think Rune's omitting it because he's malicious or anything, right? It's just he's obviously very busy and he obviously cares a lot about getting it through. But it's just, yeah, like I said, to me it would be more convincing if Rune did try and red team it, right, and sort of explained what he thought the worst, like the downsides were and the worst case scenarios and the risks and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that is challenging about Rune when talking about these types of concepts is that Rune seems to always have an answer for everything. And it would be nice to see sometimes where we'd ask a question and, you know, for example, in the transition, yeah, the devil's in the details with all of this. It's like the initial MIPS don't really mean too much. They set some structure up at a high level, but it's like, you know, just as a very simple example, the way that PE is being presented in the end game and the roles and responsibilities. And in my past, having a close working relationship with that team and understanding the dynamics there are some big gaps. And there's this mixing of current state and future state. And so a little more grounded in reality is where I'd love to see these conversations go. But unfortunately, a lot of times it doesn't get there.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think, from my perspective, I agree completely that, in this proposal, like the devil is in the details. And I do think Rune's trying to shift focus a little bit to the transition and kind of like operational plan. That's going to be like the toughest part because there's no shortage of complexity. There's no shortage of things to do. And, a lot of people are kind of like in limbo, not knowing, where they fit in, if they fit in at all in this new end game structure. And even, if there are places for people to go, it's not necessarily clear 100% like what they should be working on, what the priorities are. So I think, definitely needs to be some conversations around, okay, like, and I think Rune's trying to work on this, but, what are the next few steps and like, how do we like red team the most, unclear aspects of the plan to try and get to something that, will be successful.
And does everybody still get the impression that it's going to be clustering of 7 MetaDAOs, and each MetaDAO is limited to 7 individuals?
I think that's the plan. I know Long can probably comment more on the government. I've been, almost purely focused on the protector DAOs. So I'm trying to like model out how this, sort of protocol would work, and how this business would work. So, a lot of the big like questions are still like up in the air to be, aligned with Rune on. Basically like how much value he wants to accrue to the MetaDAO token relative to Maker. Some of the token allocation stuff, which is defined like a high level. But I think like, the value accrual between the MDAO token and the Maker token needs to be like super clear. And right now it's kind of obfuscated a little bit because the value flow like goes like from Maker to the MetaDAO, then back to Maker from the MetaDAO a little bit. I'm definitely curious about governor DAOs. And I've spent a little more time on them recently, but I think, yeah, I would love to hear your perspective in addition to what you've written, Lon.
I mean, I can kind of reiterate, I guess, what I wrote down, right? Like, I don't think that makes sense quite as much as the other DAOs. But in terms of like in practice and like, who's going to be in the governor DAOs, like, like what the organization's going to be, all this sort of stuff. I don't really know. I'm not actively planning to be in one, right? Like, if someone asked me, maybe, but like, it's not something I'm actively seeking. I know Rune has spoken to Pros and Patrick, but like, yeah, I'm not going to share anything they've said to me about it at this stage.
So I guess like the governor DAOs, how do they capture value? If you don't mind explaining or if anyone else can explain that.
Was I muted then? I think I was talking, but perhaps I was not. Yeah, I mean, I think they capture value. Well, in theory, they capture value in the same way as the others, right? Like they can still adopt faults, I believe, and they can still like duplicate the things that creator DAOs do. But I think that because they're not like focused on it primarily, they're gonna like be outcompeted, right? I think the other way they accrue value is from Maker directly, right? Like they get paid the results guarantee in exchange for like making sure that things get done the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, because kind of like my head, the creator DAOs are kind of similar to D3M implementations where they're doing a lot of like on-chain collateral through like new products essentially, and then protector DAOs are more focused on the off-chain real-world assets. So I'm guessing so it sounds like the governor DAO is kind of in the former category naturally.
Kind of, I mean, it's kind of its own category, right? In that it's not like directly supposed to be focusing on that sort of stuff, like the revenue stuff or like the the growth or the any of that stuff really. Like it's supposed to be focusing on essentially running like Maker Core and the scopes that exist. So like, yeah, I don't know what that looks like in practice. It's still a little up in the air. I think like Rune's obviously written about councils and tribunals and all this stuff and how they interact, but I think even he admits it's still a little unclear how it's going to work in practice, how it's going to like evolve as we try and implement it.
Yeah, this was a key area when I talked to Rune last, as far as, you know, trying to understand the difference between the creator and the protector. And that seems to be at least clear now for me, where it's like you adopt a vault. And if you adopt a decentralized vault, basically you're a creator and you use a front end in your community to drive revenue, and you get that 25% that comes back to you. It's a little less clear exactly the compensation model as it relates to the protector MetaDAOs and the RWAs. There's a junior tranche of capital and such that go along with it. But then when he started talking about the governor MetaDAOs, it got a little confusing for me, because it was, you know, there's this body that does certain functions, and that's also responsible for scopes as well as responsible for accountability, and allowing more funds to flow or less funds to flow into some of these MetaDAOs based upon, you know, whether the scopes were being met or not being met. So that's the area where it'd be nice to have a lot more clarity, because when you talk about something like PE staying the same and being part of the core, but being a scope and being one of, he termed it yesterday a fat scope, and then also suggested risk was probably one of those as well. It's a little confusing exactly what would make up one of those scopes. So just some more commentary.
All right, thank you, Robert. Do we have any more feedback, thoughts, or comments on this? I know we've got a DVC call this afternoon, but it's a good back and forth. And just as a time reminder, we've got about 10 minutes left in the session today. All right. All right. Not hearing any more comments or thoughts. I think it was a good session. Talked about MKR compensation in the end game today. Our last call for any comments or any more thoughts. Okay.
So are we discussing this on the GNR today?
Let's see. GNR today. I think we've got the merge part. Let's see, initiatives. It's going to be merge party. Let's see, MIP 81 and MIP 80 is two of the discussions. Coinbase and then the MKR comp. So, Karen.
Do you know if Coinbase is showing up this time, or it's going to be the same guessing game? Probably guessing game one.
Frank, I don't have the answer to that unless someone else does.
So it's going to be actually a presentation by GovAlpha about the state of the proposal and whether it's like governance ready and some of their concerns. But Representative Coinbase is not coming, or at least is not confirmed. So if they come, it will be a surprise to me personally.
I mean, they have to run all their replies through legal. They just posted a big reply on the thread, so I'd highly recommend checking that out. I think it answers some of those common questions. Yeah, I don't know how much time we should spend on it, especially relative to the endgame MIPS, which are a much more massive paradigm change in how, you know, the org's going to look. And I think, you know, Long's summary is a great place to kind of kick off that discussion, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can imagine that the MIP from Coinbase, MIP 81 is, as everybody can tell, is incomplete. So I guess Gulf Alpha will have a bunch of things that need to be filled there. But yeah, but this is good to discuss it.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next week. Tonight. Tim, Black, I just wanted to see if you wanted to mention something about your call too.
Yeah, so last week we had a good DVC comments sort of fig jam session, which I think was pretty helpful for providing feedback on the forums. So tomorrow I'm going to try and focus our time on bringing the feedback to the actual DVC call with Rune, kind of get a little bit of a structured set of Q&A. You could call it light red teaming. You can label it however you want, but ideally, whomever shows up tomorrow, we can all put our heads together and start to refine some of the weaker points in Rune's plan. One that comes to mind for me is just why everything all at once and why not a phased rollout? It still hasn't been answered. And then Long has a bunch of other things on his thread. As Mark pointed out, it's a great place to start. So it'd be nice to concisely go over that in a DVC when we come back with the proposal author. So that's the intention tomorrow, and I just have to post the agenda later today.
All right. Thank you, Tim. All right. Any last comments before we wrap up? All right. With that, that said, I appreciate everybody joining today. You know, we'll get the GNR call here coming up, the DVC call later today. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll have the recording out here tomorrow for reviewing, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Thanks for everyone.